number 15 endangered, number 16 critically endangered, number 17 and 18 endangered. So over half of these morphs, these populations, are endangered or critically endangered. So how can you go about trying to designate conservation priorities? Well, you can use this, you can do that through genetics. You can sample all these different populations. You can look at their genetic diversity, look at which ones are most molecularly distinct, and then those are the ones that you might want to start focusing on if you're trying to do conservation, if you're trying to preserve the evolutionary history of this group. So this is what I set out to do. This is a pretty ambitious project as far as sampling goes because they range across equatorial Africa. So these are different localities that I had to sample from. Now, I couldn't do this all on my own. I had a lot of help from collaborators, people who sent me samples from different areas. But for some of these areas, I did have to travel to. So these are the places I've been to in the past 5 years. So this is the Gambia over here, Cameroon over here, this island Bioko off the coast of Cameroon, which is part of Equatorial Guinea, Uganda and Kabale National Park, and the Zungwa Mountain National Park in Tanzania. So I had to go to all these places and collect samples non-invasively. So if you're collecting samples from wild populations that are endangered, typically you have to do this non-invasively. So when I say I'm going around and collecting non-invasive samples, that's kind of a nice way of saying I go around and follow monkeys and collect monkey poop. So here's me collecting a nice, fresh, steamy turd. And I put these in these little preservative, or in these little plastic containers that are sealed, and then they have with preservative in them. So this one, I typically get a lot of questions about my fieldwork. One of the questions I typically get is, can you identify, or do different species, does the poop of different species look different? So I can say yes, you can identify the species that these different fecal pellets come from. Another question I typically get is, what is your fieldwork like? So that's what I want to spend the next few parts of this lecture talking about, because it's very complicated. It depends on where I am. It depends what the infrastructure is present. It depends on how the primates are behaving and what threats they face. For example, primates in hunted areas behave very differently than primates in areas where they're not hunted. So I first want to talk about the Gambia. So this is the first place I visited in Africa in 2005. It's one of the smallest countries in Africa, if not the smallest country in Africa. And the major threat to primates here is habitat fragmentation. Most of my work was done in a place called Ubuko Nature Reserve in the Gambia. So here's an idea of what the kind of wildlife diversity there is in Ubuko. Aside from red colobus monkeys, you have African green monkeys. You have spotted hyenas. You have various antelope, like this bushbuck with these kind of very distinctive markings on its body. You have lots and lots of birds. So many of the tourists here are birders. If you're familiar at all with birding culture, there's people with checklists of birds that they travel around the world to see, and they see species, they check it off their list, and they move on. This is one of my favorites, actually. This is an umbrella bird, known for its appearance there. So basically it uses its wings to cover its head, and then it shields the sun from hitting the water, and it looks for fish to eat. So it's a very interesting bird there. This is a very touristy area, so you have a lot of people coming here to see birds, a lot of people coming here to see monkeys. There are beaches nearby as well. This is off the coast of West Africa. So this was kind of an ideal situation for me because this was my first time in Africa. Most anthropologists who do field work, the first time they go to the field, they're either with someone, their advisor, or with a research group. But for whatever reason, I was under circumstances where I ended up going to the field for the first time by myself, trying to study these monkeys, trying to collect feces from these monkeys, these endangered monkeys that no one has ever done before. Some people thought it wasn't even possible. So it was probably very good that I was in this very controlled environment that had a lot of kind of tourist infrastructure. So it took me a while to figure out how to collect these samples because, like I said, no one had ever done it before. I spent a few days just trying to follow the monkeys every day, but they kept losing me in dense vegetation. There were some nights where I would follow them to their sleeping trees, and then it would get dark, and I'd be lost in the forest by myself, and it was nighttime, and I was freaking out because I didn't know if I'd ever make it out. Being lost in a forest in Africa at night by yourself is not it's kind of a scary experience, especially when there are like all these local rumors that the forests are haunted. And anyway, so after a week of trying these different strategies of collecting samples with no success, I finally decided to wake up as early as possible and try to find them first thing in the morning. So wake up at 5 a.m., try to find them in their sleeping trees. And that worked out really well, because in the morning when they wake up, they all go to the bathroom. So the first time I collected a sample was actually one that hit me. So my days, so once I established the system, I would wake up first thing in the morning around 5 a.m. I'd eat, then I'd go out and try to find them. I'd collect the samples. I'd spend the rest of the day trying to follow other troops. And then at night, I would follow a troop to its sleeping tree, put it to bed, so that the next morning I would know where to find that group. And I just kind of do that over and over again, day after day. So I was typically spending between 12 and 14 hours in the forest at a time. Then I'd get home, I'd wash up, I'd eat, then kind of pass out from exhaustion. As far as where home is, it just kind of depended on the different areas. Like I said, this is a very touristy area that I was working, so there were these kind of tourist hostels that were across the street from the nature reserve that I was able to use. So this is the courtyard in the hostel. This is my room. This is a dog that really hated me. And this is the owner, Mohammed, with his brother, Kabir. So like I said, this was a very kind of cushy situation. It was probably a good thing because this is my first time doing this work in Africa. And this area also had occasional electricity, running water, so those were nice amenities to have. A different place in the Gambia I went to was a little bit more remote. It was about a 10-hour drive inland from the Buko Nature Reserve. It wasn't exactly that far from the Buko Nature Reserve, but the roads are so bad it just takes 10 hours to get there. But this is a really remote area. So again, I was near a forest, but I had to stay in the village. So this is the hut that I stayed in. I had the nicest hut in the village. This is what one of the typical huts looks like. They save the nicest ones for white people, so in Africa I'm technically white. This is actually a hut that is typically used by a Peace Corps volunteer. So this is where I was staying. This is my room. But you know, the base changed, but and the circumstances there was no running water, no electricity. I had to get my water from a well for drinking water, for bathing water. But the work was essentially the same. I still had to go to the forest, spend time in there, find monkeys in the morning, find them at night before they went to bed, and so forth. So another place I've been is Korp National Park in Cameroon, also a very different experience from what I just described in the Gambia. This is in West Central Africa, so this is one of the wettest places in Africa, and it has a very diverse primate community. The ecology there, this is your very kind of classic old growth rainforest, kind of pristine, very lush. And the main threat here is hunting. So you have these various guenons, these Trichopithecus monkeys. You have chimps there. You have these forest baboons that are very endangered called drills. And then you have this Prus's red colobus monkey, which is what I was collecting from. So here's the entrance to the park. So you have this large bridge that looks like something out of an Indiana Jones movie that looks very precarious, and it kind of is, but I guess it did the job. So the conditions here were very different. Again, this is a very remote area. I did not have a kind of tourist hostel or village to stay in, so I had to live in the forest for 1 to 2 weeks at a time. So this meant taking in a team of people, usually a team of porters to carry all the equipment and food, a camp manager, a cook, and a field guide. So here you have my porters crossing the bridge. I don't know if you can tell what's going on there, but this one porter has a 25 to 35 pound bag on his back and another one on his head. He's probably wearing flip-flops or something. It's about a 6 or 8 hour hike to the base camp over pretty rough terrain, and my porters still beat me to the camp. This is the base camp I used. This is kind of a tourist camp that's built in the forest. It's actually not there anymore. It was destroyed this past year. You can ask me about that some other time. It's kind of a long story. And then from here, I would take trips, 6 to 8 hour hikes, and set up these satellite camps to move around the forest to try to find these monkeys. Here's the team of field workers that I hired from a local village. they were working with me. So like I said, this is one of the wettest places in Africa. It was very humid. So the conditions were very different than what I'd experienced before. Again, I'd wake up around 5 a.m. I'd put on a wet, moldy t-shirt because nothing ever dried. I'd try to get out of camp by 6 a.m. to try to find the monkeys when they first woke up. Also, I'd try to get out by 6 a.m. because that's when the bees start to swarm the camp. So I did not want to be around that. And then I'd come back. I'd conveniently arrange my arrival back into the camp around 6 p.m. because that's when the bees leave. People often ask me, what do I eat in the forest? So I was looking for pictures of food that I eat in the forest. And this is the only one I could find. And this is not a typical example of what I would eat in the forest. This is actually the only picture I have because it was an exceptional meal. What you're seeing here is rice with plantains. This is a smoked piece of cow meat, a smoked piece of beef. And then the sauce over here is some kind of ground nut or peanut sauce with palm oil. So this was an actually very exceptional, very good meal that is very atypical of what I was eating in the forest. This one night, we just happened to have this. More typical was something like rice and beans and sardines, or spaghetti and sardines, or sardine stew, or sardines and crackers. So lots and lots of sardines. If you don't like sardines, you could maybe replace that with a cheap version of Spam. Sometimes the Spam was mixed with the sardines. Also, this is what we would have for dinner, but you would also have the same thing the next morning for breakfast. So at 5 a.m., you'd wake up and have a giant plate of spaghetti and sardines to put down. And you had to put it down because you probably wouldn't eat again for a while. You would probably bring some small snacks out while you're walking around the forest, but you wouldn't have another full meal again for another 12 hours. So yeah, putting down a giant plate of spaghetti and sardines at 5 a.m. is an acquired ability, let's say. So getting around Cameroon was also an interesting experience. You would probably get around in one of these types of vehicles, maybe this bus here. My favorite was the bush taxi. So this is a bush taxi that I had hired. So this is all my field equipment crammed into the trunk of this beat up, probably 1982 or two-door Toyota Corolla or whatever it is. So to give you an idea of what it's like traveling around in a bush taxi, so if you picture yourself in your car and try to picture a comfortable number of people that would fit in your car. Now this is a two-door, like I said, beat up Corolla or something like that. And you'd be crammed in this car with 7 other people. So 8 people in this car. You'd have maybe 4 people in the back, 4 people in the front. So 2 people in the driver's seat, 2 people in the passenger seat. For, like I said, a 4, 6, 8-hour drive on these treacherous roads. So this is kind of what travel in Cameroon is like. I often get questions like, you must have had some crazy near-death experiences while you're in Africa in the field. Well, yeah, every time I stepped in the car, it was pretty much a near-death experience. Very close to Korup National Park is this island Bioko, part of Equatorial Guinea. Same faunal community that you find in Korup. And this was actually my most recent trip to Africa, just this past winter break. This is where I was. And again, hunting is the biggest threat here. The field work was very similar to Korup. I had to live in the forest for a couple weeks in tents. But some of the logistics were different. For one, it's an island, so there was about a 3-hour boat ride to the southern part of the island where the monkeys are most abundant. I was part of an expedition, so there were about 30 people on this expedition, so carrying equipment and food and toilet paper and whatever for 30 people for 2 weeks in the forest. It's just a lot of stuff. So this is the pile of equipment that was on the boat. These are some dolphins that we often saw playing in the wake of the boat. Now this is a remote area, so there was no dock for this boat, so we had to unload the boat with these smaller boats to take to the shore. So it took almost a whole day to unload the boat and set up the camp. It wasn't too bad. They do this expedition every year, so if you're interested in going here, just you can talk to me, and we can look into arranging that. But there's some years where the tide is really rough, and some of these boats would capsize, and people would be in the water, and they'd lose their equipment, and so that did not happen to me, thankfully.